Hello, I'm Honey Khan. Welcome to VisionTV Insight. This past weekend, Palestinian suicide bombers killed at least 25 Israelis and wounded more than 150 others. Yet another tragedy in a series of retaliations that began 14 months ago. In that time, over 1,000 people have died, more than 75% of them Palestinian. Two cultures, two religions in a land each claim as their own. At this moment, the prospects for peace seem very slim. Many people fear tensions could escalate throughout the Middle East. Canadians with family ties to the region watch and wait once again. VisionTV Insight spent some time with Canadian Palestinians and Jews to explore how events over there affect their communities here. Here's an in-depth report.
We've assembled here tonight to be in solidarity with the State of Israel and with its people at a time when Israel is under siege, both at home and throughout the world.
I know that when you watch the news, it's very hard and it's very painful, even when you watch it from a long distance, as most of you, under the circumstance, are doing. I must say it's very difficult for us as well. It's very difficult because no matter how strong we are, it is so difficult to have to face these terrible tragedies which have now become part of the daily routine of so many of us.
שלום, שלום. תודה רבה.
As a child growing up in this society, I really didn't know what to call myself. I didn't know if, referring to myself as a Palestinian, first of all, most people would not recognize. They didn't understand what Palestine was, what a Palestinian was, and so for me, I was sort of torn between really sort of trying to be proud of my background while not being judged by others based on the representation of Palestinians in media. I've constantly been more active trying to provide a wider, clearer representation of what Palestinians are about, from a cultural aspect, from a political aspect, and from a religious aspect. And the diversity is what I like to express, within the people themselves. So this really homogeneous representation on TV as all of them being terrorists or, non-peace lovers is something that I like to try to correct.
Prohibitions?
Right.
Where do they say it comes from?
It's the center of my life, I guess, is the one way to put it, and that's not even too strong. I think Israel, for me, is just, somehow not just spiritual, not just religious, not just national, it's all that put together. That's where we take from that verse that talks about Adam in the Garden of Eden. I think the rabbis extrapolate from that the 7 laws, so it might not be actually from Noah. It looks like we're heading towards a very serious conflict where there's going to be a lot at stake, and I really wish that wasn't going to happen, but I know that, I hope and pray that we're that we're going to be able to defend Israel, and hopefully the price won't be too high.
We still have a great deal of family in the West Bank, Jordan, Kuwait, and scattered throughout the Middle East. When I go there, I realize that it is so much a part of who I am, in the sense that that's where my heritage is. Whenever I visit my family's village, it amazes me when I look around to see what a different life my parents had from the one that I'm having right now, but yet I still feel some sort of connection to it because I realize that's where my roots are. It's a place that I have also a spiritual connection to because it's so central to Islam and so much a part of my family's faith, and obviously political, given what's going on and what has been going on for so many years there. I think for the most part it doesn't have such a big impact on my dealings with people, except when I encounter ignorance and when I encounter racism and statements that I think are unfounded and not based in any real fact. I think when people find out who you are and they ask, oh, you're Palestinian, or oh, you're an Arab or a Muslim, you know, there's a joke about why am I not wearing a veil, why am I not carrying a gun, why am I, you know, blowing up planes or whatever the case may be. So in that sense, I mean, it creates a lot of frustration, and you feel this need to constantly educate, defend, justify who you are, where you're coming from. And that can be very tiresome because sometimes you just want to say, I'm Canadian, and that's the end of it. I'm just like everybody else here.
The state of Israel, to me, means a place where we can be safe and secure. It means a place we can run to if we have to. And it's the place where we're allowed to actualize ourselves as Jews. Now, it's very important that I say this, and I'm not saying this to be obsequious. I love Canada. But I think as a Jew, you know, we often say we're Canadian Jews. So in other words, Canada is our home, but Israel's our home as well. We have two homes, you know? I guess we're lucky that way, you know?
When I was 13 years old, it was the first time I'd ever been. The military was there, obviously, you know, and that was the first thing I saw at the border. Thinking that being a Canadian would put me in somewhat of a safe position really wasn't the truth. I mean, it still was obvious that I was of, you know, Arabic background by my name, and so with that in mind, we had to be strip searched, and I was definitely just floored at that fact. I think it was this rude awakening, and to really sort of understand what these people go through on a regular basis.
I'm deeply saddened by what's currently going on in the Middle East. It's an extremely slow process of changing ways of thinking. You know, the type of thinking that currently exists there is based on decades and decades of violence, distrust, and hate. I remember when I was a youngster living in Israel, I remember riding on an Arab bus, and looking at the people and thinking to myself, you know, like, do these people hate me that much, you know? And my Israeli brothers and sisters, do many of them hate Arabs so much that they just can't come together now and forge a strong bond?
I also was able to see the wounds of my cousin. I had two male cousins, and I realized that he couldn't walk properly, and I asked why, and he said, you know, this is from the time of the Intifada. And I said, really? I said, well, you know, were you part of this fighting that's been going on? And he said, you know, we can't sit here and watch this happen. You know, there's really nothing for us to sit and do. We don't have rights to, you know, education. We don't have the ability to live a free life and to feel as though we have the potential to grow or the potential to be something else one day. And so he said, so until this occupation ends, you know, we are not going to stop fighting. And in my mind, I mean, I live such a comfortable life here. I can't even fathom the idea of going, you know, right into the streets and fighting against tanks and, you know, artillery that, you know, that the Israeli army has and not to fear my life. These young boys are determined to free themselves and to free their people. And that determination, I can't understand or I can't comprehend entirely.
We all know that indeed Yerushalayim is the heart of all this dispute. Arafat knows that if he will be successful in forcing Israel to pull out from Yerushalayim, then there is no end to what he can achieve in every other part of the land of Israel. Every part of Israel is important. Every part of Israel is ours. And we feel that we don't have to apologize for saying it, that every part of Israel is ours.
I don't support violence in any shape or form, or the use of it to further political goals. Though we really have to recognize one point, and that is these people have been terrorized, and they have been terrorized by the state of Israel. So for us to really go and look at this definition of terrorism, which we define as being not associated by a state or a religious group or a cultural group, it's sort of these acts of violence, taken out by individuals. We have to also recognize that terrorism can, be performed at the state level. And so, in my opinion, it's this idea that within Israel, the day that the state of Israel was created, it was created through the means of force, through the means of violence, in order to occupy it. And I feel as though you can see, obviously, over the past 50 years that there has been violence and force used by the Israeli government. And in order for the Palestinians to survive, as some say, they need to defend themselves or retaliate, to state that you're not going to, bulldoze us out of our land, you're not going to push us away.
Terror is not a new weapon. Throughout history, it has been used by those who could not prevail, either by persuasion or by example, but inevitably they all fail, either because men are not afraid to die for a life worth living, or because the terrorists themselves have come to realize that free men cannot be frightened by threats, and that aggression will meet its own response. And it is in light of that history that every nation today should know, be he friend or foe, that the Jewish nation, the Jewish people, has both the will and the strength to promote and fight those challenges wherever they may be. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit the same small planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. And let us pray on this evening and on every evening that follows that those who challenge us feel the same way.
I support the uprising of the people against oppression. And that is oppression, occupation, any form of government interference in their day-to-day lives, in their rights as human beings, according to the UN Human Rights Declaration, I don't agree with. So I definitely support the Intifada from that perspective.
It's difficult for me to say this, but if someone is coming to kill my children, then I would kill them first. And I think that it's a necessity to assassinate people who are coming to wipe out, our family. And it's not something that I'm proud of. It's not something that I would celebrate. And if I saw my fellow Jews celebrating it, I would tell them that it wasn't appropriate.
My perception of Judaism is that it's absolutely a religion of peace. When we do our daily prayers, it's all about achieving peace, trying to, that's the highest value. One of the highest values in Judaism is peace. We say we want peace for our community, ourselves, and for the world. So I think, and we say there's a beautiful verse that we sing every time we take out the Torah scrolls in the synagogue that says, all her paths are peace. And I really believe that.
There's also this sense of guilt that I can use my passport to leave such a conflict-ridden area, and that my father's brothers and sisters and their children live such a different existence than I do, just by sheer luck that I live in Canada and they don't. the main thing is education and awareness, because a lot of people don't have that. And I think even there, in the Middle East, it's lacking. There's very little that's being done to inform Arab populations about Jewish traditions, Jewish cultures, that sort of thing. And I think the opposite is true as well, that the Jewish community, particularly more so in North America, I think, than in Israel itself, where, you know, they're forced to counter these issues. I think there is a great vacuum there. There's just this knowledge that needs to be given to people.
We have coexistence, but we're sort of, the communities are buffered from each other. And unfortunately, I've seen in cases, or not firsthand, but in cases where, say, the Palestinian community is confronting the Jewish community, there's some pretty ugly sentiments there. So, and having parents have gone through the war, and when there's a lot of sentiments that just simply haven't gone away through the millennia. And when you take the masks off, those hatreds are still there. So unless and until those are really resolved on an honest level between individuals and communities, and I think that starts with each oneself. You have to say, is what I believe correct? Am I being honest with myself? If not, how can I try to be more realistic and truthful in what I believe, and then being willing to change your views. I think any philosophical system requires a great amount of knowledge, and I don't have, say, all the Jewish knowledge that I'd like, and I haven't engaged in enough debates with the opposing point of view, which is really the true way of getting to the truth, by really coming up against somebody who believes something different and really arguing it out in an honest way. I don't do that very often. I'm of two minds. I mean, part of me is very happy. I think it's an interesting idea to talk to somebody from, you know, a different camp on this issue. But I think from what I know, what I've heard from other people, there's very few people in the Palestinian camp are moderates.
How are you?
Great, thanks. Thanks. Did you have any trouble finding the place?
Oh, no. Live right down the road, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great. That's really convenient.
Yeah.
And my sense of anticipation is that this might well be difficult, because she could well be somebody who's going to be hitting me with a lot of information that may or may not be the way I understand the situation. So I'm looking forward to it, but I'm a little bit anxious at the same time. I think the average Palestinian, the average Jew, either there is a good relationship or there's a potential for a good relationship. Is that your impression there as well?
I think so. I mean, for the most part, I don't think people are innately evil or inherently bad. I think everybody just wants to live life, and, you know, they want to have a peaceful coexistence. But I think the situation the way it is right now it doesn't lend itself to that, simply because you have the power politics that exist right now they don't lend themselves to that. You have a situation of occupier and occupied. So I think until you have more of a level playing field, it's going to be difficult to establish those kinds of meaningful and lasting relationships.
But I mean, 98% of the Palestinians are now under Palestinian control, so it's no longer...
That's not true, though. That's a myth. That's a myth, because Israeli forces are still, they haven't left the occupied territories altogether. They've been redeployed. So in everyday life, Palestinians are still encountering military occupation authorities.
Give me an example.
Well, just as recently as yesterday, the Israelis went back into cities like Bethlehem and Ramallah, and they've always been there at checkpoints anyway.
Checkpoints, but not actually in the Palestinian areas. And they just went back as a result of the assassination last week of the cabinet ministers. I'm sure you're aware there was a reason for that.
No, but to say that those areas are now completely or almost completely under Palestinian control, I think is misleading, because so long as they're at the checkpoints, the military authorities are at checkpoints, then they control who comes in and out of those areas. Right. They control mobility, they control access to employment, they control the free flow of people and goods between towns and cities.
The only reason they do that is for security. If the region is secure, and if Palestinians aren't shooting at Jews from areas like opposite Gilo, if not shooting at Jews in Hebron and different areas, they're only going to there to make sure that they're not shooting at Palestinians. There's supposed to be a ceasefire, and again, the Palestinians are violating, and so the only choice the Israelis have, just like it was here, if there were people shooting at, say, people in Scarborough, the response has got to be the government has a responsibility to protect the citizens. It has to go and do that.
I think in the long run, the Israeli public is going to be much better off if they actually look at the reasons why uprisings exist. It's not sporadic and sudden, and it just sort of falls out of the sky. These things don't happen in a vacuum.
We've posted more information on this issue on our website, visiontv.ca. Click on Programs, then Vision TV Insight, and follow the links to resources.